Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the IAC Writers in Conversation series. My name is Jing Han. I'm the director of the Institute for Australian Asian Arts and Culture at Western Sydney University. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Baramatical people of the Darug Nation, whose ancestors have been the traditional owners of the land for thousands of years, and pay our respect to First Nations elders, past and present. We are delighted and greatly honored to open our 2026 series with the acclaimed journalist and author Tracey Holmes. And this event is presented in partnership with the Writing and Society Research Centre at Western Sydney University. One thing I know for sure is that this conversation is going to be candid, insightful, and very interesting. Having read Tracey's book twice for this conversation and having known Tracey for some years. Just briefly introducing Tracey. Tracey Holmes is one of Australia's most recognized broadcasters with a career spanning nearly 40 years across radio, television, and digital media. She is internationally respected for the work exploring the intersection of sport, politics, culture, and society on a global stage, and has built a strong reputation for rigorous reporting on the political, economic, and ethical dimensions of global sport. Tracey has covered 14 Olympic Games, as well as multiple FIFA men's and women's World Cups, and major national sporting events. Her work has taken her around the world, offering in-depth analysis of how global sporting bodies operate and how major events intersect with geopolitics. Through her reporting and long-form interviews, she has brought athletes from diverse backgrounds and nations to audiences worldwide. Tracey has won twice the prestigious International Sports Press Association Gold Award and is a recipient of the IOC Women and Sport Award and Sport Australian's Lifetime Achievement Award. Tracey holds a master's degree in communications and is currently doing another master's in international sports diplomacy at a university in Hungary. As if she isn't busy enough doing so many things across the globe. Now, please welcome Tracey Holmes to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Tracey. So happy to see you. And thank you so much for making the time for us. And we are very appreciative and grateful.
Look, it's absolutely my pleasure. First of all, I was very surprised to be asked, so thank you. I take it as a great honour, and I've always got lots to talk about, so it's an easy thing to do.
You have lots of interesting things to talk about, and I have a lot of questions. So yeah, let's start. Time is short. So my first question is, you have been in this trade for so many years. What eventually triggered or motivated you to write this book? And who did you write the book for?
Well, two very good questions to start with, Jing. I'll probably sort of meander a little bit in all of my answers because that's just kind of how my life has unfolded. Why it was time to write the book? Look, I'd been considering leaving the ABC for some time, and this was getting towards the end of 2023 after the magnificent FIFA Women's World Cup that we'd had. And people had been asking me, I'd been approached by publishing houses previously, asking me if I'd like to write a book. And I just didn't think the time was right. And quite frankly, I didn't think I had enough to say for a book. And my husband talked me into it. He said, "You've got so much to say about so many things." And I thought, yeah, maybe I do. And maybe it's time. And so I think it coincided nicely with the fact that I was leaving the ABC as a full-time employee then. It gave me some more time to think. So who did I write it for? I think, it's like when you do television, people always say to you, don't think about if there's 10 people or 100 people or 1,000 or 1,000,000 people watching. Think about one person that you're talking to. And so I tried to think about that person. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought the people I like talking to are the people who are interested in sport like I am. But I also like talking to people who have no interest in sport whatsoever, to try and convince them that it's the most fascinating place because it's got everything playing out. And I always used to laugh when a lot of the ABC audience, as you would know, often say things like, oh, yeah, I don't follow sport at all. I'm much more into politics. And I used to say to them, well, that's really funny because there's more politics in sport than there is in politics. So if you like politics, have a look at sport. So I guess I was writing it in the end for anybody.
Such a good answer. I'm the latter, indeed. I always thought I was not interested in sports until, I listened to your podcast and then your interviews. And yes, I'm always interested in politics. So yes, such a good answer. And I really enjoyed, and that explains why I enjoyed this book so much. And I want to ask you, do you believe that one needs to bleed a little to write a good memoir?
Yes, probably, and I probably didn't bleed enough. And I think if there's, if there's one failing I can identify in my own writing, it is that. And I think it's because I'm so interested in everything else that's happening out there, and those intersections that are taking place, and the geopolitics, and like at the moment we're seeing the USA, Canada, and Mexico getting ready to host the FIFA World Cup. It's the biggest ever FIFA World Cup. You've got Israel and America at war with Iran. Iran has qualified. The USA says, yes, they can compete, but won't give them visas to come in, so they'll be staying in Mexico. I think all of those things are really interesting. And the publisher that I was working with kept saying to me, yes, but give us a little bit more about you. And it's like, but compared to all of that, I'm not interesting. And he said, no, people are interested. And so he kind of dragged that part out of me. And I guess that's why the book kind of meanders a little between things that happened in my life, the way I grew up, my childhood, and the impact of those experiences, and how I think they shaped the way that I see the world now when I'm looking at these bigger stories of sport and geopolitics.
I can see that because reading the book, yes, so there are lots of interesting events that you covered, and then that's fascinating. As Stan says, you have so much to write about, so you should write another book. So after this,
An even better book.
well, equally good, definitely for sure. So let's go in back to your childhood because your childhood it's fascinating to many people. So people who do not know where you came from, and and I see there is a link. So let's just say let's so in the book you said your dad was a surfer, a sailor, and a skier, and very much adventurer. So as a child, you lived in South Africa and Hawaii with your parents. So, what kind of influence did your dad and your childhood living environment have on your life and career?
My father probably taught me not to worry, which has been of great angst to my mother ever since, because she worries. And sometimes I think she wonders if I have a pulse, because when everything's just going crazy and mad, and it's like the ceiling's blown off and everything's just going wrong, I'm quite happy to sit there and observe and see what happens and take control when I can, and move things around when I can, but I don't get flustered. And I think I got that from my father. So he was very much an adventurer, yes, but not in a sort of go get 'em sense. He was much more relaxed, like riding the wave of life. And so wherever that wave took him, he went. He was a country, what I can think of all sorts of words. I'm trying to be nice here. So he was a bit of a larrikin, I think, as a kid, a bit of a hillbilly in the nicest sense. But he then moved to Manly. He had a kind of split parent situation. He moved to Manly, took up surfing, made surfboards basically to cover the time that he would go away surfing. When he ran out of money, he'd come back and make more surfboards. In the meantime, my mother married him and he heard the surf was good in South Africa, so off we went to South Africa. So my mum never knew where the next paycheck was coming from, if we could afford the rent from week to week, where he would be from morning to night, because he'd go to work and sometimes not come home for weeks on end because he'd heard the surf was good about 800 kilometres away. So he'd go surfing. And when he got home, he'd walk through the door, and obviously my mum was kind of stressed out. And he was sort of like, "Oh, what's the problem? Like, yeah, it's going to come back at some point." And so that can be pretty infuriating for people. I get that. But I definitely got that sense of exploring the world from him. And wherever the wave takes you, I'm very happy to go.
Hmm. Yes, he was very sporty. So was your mom. Your mom was a talented athlete, and she actually dreamed of competing at the Olympics. Her dream wasn't realized, but you went on to cover 14 Olympics. Was there some kind of genetic connection?
A genetic tension, maybe.
A connection?
No,
Good word, good word.
because she really wanted to be an Olympian, and for a multitude of reasons, that just didn't happen for her. My father came along shortly after I came along, and her Olympic dreams were over. But we were in South Africa, we went to Hawaii, we travelled around, so she did get a kind of a sporting fix from that. She was a surfer as well. She competed alongside my father in different events. So she was very competitive in that sense. But she got to run with the torch, and I've never told her this. In fact, I've never told anyone this, but I'll tell you, Jing, and everyone else. If you can just keep it to yourselves, that'd be great. But I nominated my mum to carry the torch for the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games in the torch relay, because she had spent this life of giving, giving to other people. And even though her dreams had not been realised, she really supported so many people who were endeavouring to achieve theirs. And so I nominated her, and she got accepted, and she ran with the torch on Manly Beach. And I think that was such a special day for her. And I thought it was just wonderful that, she got to carry that flame at a really sort of big and significant and proud moment in Australia's Olympic history. So, yeah, I kind of, that was how I said thank you to her.
Oh, incredible. Yes,
But
indeed.
she still tells me, yes, I think it was my boss at this job that I worked at that nominated me. And I just, yeah, maybe it was.
That's a mother and a daughter. Yes. Yeah. Oh, such a incredible story, and there's such good gesture that you thought of. And this is leading to my next question, which is really how you got to do what you do. So because once you finished school and you were contemplating becoming either a marine biologist or ASIO spy. So the two things are connected. Did you become a sports journalist and a broadcaster, do you think by chance or by destiny?
Look, I think it very much depends on, which day you're asking that question. I think it was probably destiny because it has suited me so well. I love listening to other people's stories. I love really kind of getting into their journey and how they ended up where they ended up, and looking at how paths cross and then diverse, and then just the way the world fits together like a jigsaw puzzle. So I think in that respect, I was always going to do something like that. How marine biology fit in, I just used to like spending time at the beach. How ASIO fitted in, well, I thought it'd be pretty cool to travel the world and just listen to people. So yeah, I guess I kind of combined the two and came up with sports journalism. So it was quite accidental. Again, when I was small, my mum used to put my sister and I into surfing contests, and I had absolutely no desire whatsoever to compete in a surfing event. But she would make us go out there. My sister was very competitive, went on to become a professional surfer. Uh, I used to paddle out the back, sit there, talk to all of my opponents. I would know everything about their lives. They'd be catching waves in and out, and I'd just be sitting there talking to them. And when the heater would finish, we'd all have to paddle in. I wouldn't have caught a wave, so that meant I would be eliminated, and I was very happy about that. And I'd also gathered all of this intel about all the people that I was competing with. And so one thing led to another, and here I am telling the stories of other people and traveling the world, talking to people who were very interesting.
That's so telling. It is definitely by destiny, by nature. That's what you are. And yeah, so interesting. And obviously, sports journalism, as you know, has been traditionally male dominated. And that's why you were the first female presenter on the national sports program and Stan Grant on ABC. And I used to listen to that. What factors do you think contributing to this profession being male dominated, despite participation in sports and the pursuit of sporting activities being generally gender balanced?
Yeah, so I think it's quite interesting when, my husband and I went and lived overseas for 14 years or whatever. And when we came back, I remember going to some of our own children's sporting events, that have the end of season barbecue or the awards night or whatever. And even then, so we're talking now sort of, the early 2010s, and you'd head into these functions and the men would all be over there and the women would all be over there. And I remember thinking, even when I was young, that was something that struck me about Australia when we moved back here from years overseas when I was a child. And in some ways, that still hasn't changed in certain pockets. And I find that quite interesting. And one of the reasons why that fascinates me is because we tend to think of ourselves, and maybe every country does this, every country thinks of itself as the centre of the universe, the best at what they do, leading the way for others. And if only everybody could be like us, that'd be terrific. And I think we think we're a lot more gender balanced than we actually are. And I've got a story about this because when we lived in Beijing, and I worked for the China Central Television, which is now called CGTN. I went to work one day, and when I walked into the room, it was just a sort of an anomaly of the roster that week. I walked into the room, the director, the producers of the different shows that we were going to do, the camera people, the editors, the journalists, and the presenter, which was me that day, were all female. And when I walked in, I got such a shock. And they said to me, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, like, this is a sports program. This would never happen in Australia. Like, you just wouldn't walk into a room, be all women." And they looked at me and they said, "What's wrong with Australia?" And I thought that was a really good lesson for me as well. Just the way we see things and the way other people see things, and they can be quite different. And so to be able to see the world and even your own country through somebody else's lens is always quite revealing. And so with sports journalism, you might be surprised to know this, that in the Australian media, there's been a lot of equaling of the ledger between men and women working and across certain different types of journalism, if you want to do education or politics or whatever. The one that is still lagging so far behind is sport. And I think females are still at about 13%. So it's still very low compared to all of the other strains of journalism that you can go into.
Hmm. That's really interesting, and so it's not so good news, but there
Mm,
is a lot of work to be done in that
yeah.
field. But can you give us an example? Because the male and a female, they have different voices, they have different views and perspective. Uh, Give us an example where a female perspective in sports reporting differed from a male perspective.
Look, I don't know. As far as sports commentary goes, I think it's pretty equal, because you're calling the play-by-play action as it happens. So in that regard, you kind of learn to do it the best way, and that is it's gender neutral. When you start getting into interviewing, and I suppose long form interviewing is where a lot of the differences kind of come to the fore. And I think that's, I don't know, it's a variety of different reasons. But if I go back to the early days when I started at the ABC and I was the only woman there, and I'd go to do interviews, I know the questions I was asking were different to the men's. And like anything, we become quite habitualized and we start doing things by rote almost. And I think just for many, many years and decades, you'd follow the best person, but you'd be doing the same thing. And so everyone ended up doing that, and you just kept asking questions in that way. And then when I came along and I started asking things a little bit differently because I wasn't so interested in the injuries or the coaching tactics for the next week, because you could get that from 55,000 other reporters. And so I wanted to try and get something different. And so I try and get into them personally, like what is driving you? Why do you do this? And what happens when you look at your team and there's this friction because you've got to work with it. And I think a lot of the people that I was interviewing at the time were probably, first of all, shocked that some of these questions were being asked because they weren't used to that. But it also gave them time to think a bit differently and to answer differently. And then different stories would evolve from that. And I think lots of people do that now, both men and women. But I think that was a real kind of shift, especially in sport, because sport was always so quarantined over here. And my ambition and my drive was always to bring it back here, to make it relevant for everybody. And what sports people do, one of the other reasons why I decided to focus on sport as opposed to anything else is because I find sports people are really highly motivated. They're driven. They fail, they lose, but they get back up, they re-strategize, they refocus, and they try again. And that is so motivating and positive to be around. So yes, there's drama and there's trauma and there's massive disappointment, but they get back up again. And this is something that I have always I've loved. I would hate to be in any other area where that positive kind of get back up again and let's see how we go this time, if it didn't exist. I love that about sport.
As we mentioned, in Australia, sports journalism is still male dominated. So you said to stay in the race with the leading pack of men, it was a good idea to work harder, research more, arrive earlier, and leave later. This has become your work pattern till today. Would you give the same advice to young female journalists today?
Well, I would, but only if they were the same as me and they absolutely loved what they do. So I often say to people, I've got the perfect work-life balance. My life is my work. So like every moment, everything is kind of geared at that. And if there's a spare moment, I'll be working. I can find something to do, which means that the interview will be better, or I can research more, or I can find out more about this kind of element that I didn't know about previously. And so I think it drives my husband insane. And I know at other times, I'm sure he's quite proud of me, but yeah, I can very much be that person on a mission 24/7. But I love that. And I think I've just trained myself to do that and have been very happy doing it for a very long time. So it's not for everybody. Of course, not everyone will do things the same way. And I'm not saying this is the only way, but this is the way that's worked for me. And I think when you're starting out, I think it's very important to show that you'll go that extra mile, because that's when you get noticed by others who go, okay, well, we can put that responsibility on her shoulders because we know she'll come through with it, or he'll come through with it. It'll be a great day when we don't have to talk about he or she anymore, and it's just, the best person for the job, no matter who they are. That'll be a great day.
Mhm. You love sports journalism, and you shared, the stories that you see behind in sports, and lots of incredible moments you have seen and witnessed. And audiences obviously love hear those reporting on the moving, exciting, and celebratory stories. What are the stories that are very hard or hardest to report on, or like too difficult or even too divisive for audience to hear?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And there's a lot of stories. I know that a lot of the stories I do now, they're niche, they have a niche audience. The stories I try to do now, and it was where I was heading in my last few years at the ABC on the Ticket podcast that I did. And now I talk about similar issues on the Sports Ambassador podcast that I do for myself. But it's looking at the issues of sport and where some of those flashpoints are and where there's an abrasion, and it's how do we resolve that? How do we bring out the best of sport so that we can get rid of the worst of sport? Because we know it's there. We know there's stories of abuse, there's stories of corruption, there's stories of maladministration, all of that. And so I want to help make sport better by having some of those conversations which are not always comfortable. And so, having done what I have done for so long, you get to know everybody, So you get to know people who are running this sport or that sport. And when a moment of crisis happens, it's very hard because, you know that person, you like that person, but it's not about that person. It's about this situation that has developed that needs to be addressed. So difficult questions need to be answered. And so, people will sometimes say, "Oh, we thought you were our friend." It's like, well, I'm your friend. And this is part of the journey, because if your friend is being honest with you, this is a problem and you need to fix the problem. And I don't enjoy telling stories like that, but I think it's very important that people do tell those sorts of stories, but with the ambition of finding a solution. And I think there's a lot of people in the media who enjoy telling those stories because they like seeing people torn down. They like just seeing clickbait. They like seeing negativity. I don't like that at all. And so those stories for me are the hardest, even though for many other people, they don't think twice. So it's quite interesting.
Indeed, your answer is fascinating. And just a side question, of all the sports you have reported on, which is your personal favorite?
I think that's impossible. It's really impossible. I think it's interesting because sometimes it's not even the biggest, most glamorous, it can be at the Olympics and you're at the opening ceremony and the surprise person who lights the torch. But sometimes it can be in the little small stories that happen behind the scenes. And so I'll give you an example of that. The last World Cup that was in Qatar in 2022, and I could probably come up with half a dozen of these stories for every major event that I've been to. But for anyone that has been to Doha, they will know this. There's a beautiful little souk, where they've got the traditional markets and there's some little coffee shops and restaurants and some of the locals come out. The police who ride camels, they have their camel pen nearby. It's quite close to the Corniche. Like it's a beautiful little area, especially in the evenings. And in the early mornings, if you go down there for a local Arabic coffee, you'll just see all the men sitting around talking about politics and what have you. But each time I've been to Doha, and I've been there many times over the past 25 years or so, there's a little store and it's got the most interesting collection of secondhand things, from stamps to a medal from the 1936 Olympics to old cameras to like it's just all sorts. And I've never met the owner. And then one day I was in there having coffee early while the World Cup was on, and the shop opened, and I went in and I said, "When will the owner be here?" And he said, "I'm the owner." And it's like, "Oh my God, you don't know how many times I've been into your store and you haven't been here. Can you do an interview with me?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." He was a small, very quiet man. And we did this interview, and he said to me, when I was a boy, because people were criticizing Qatar for having no history of football, and this man would have been in his 70s, and he said, I played football with the father of the current emir. we were in the same team together and we have the same shirts. I can show you a photo. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. Anyway, he told me this story and I said, how do you feel then about the world coming into your place now? And there's been a lot of criticism in the 12 years building up to this. But how do you feel with all of these visitors now arriving? And he said, I feel very proud. I feel like we're the smallest, biggest city in the world because it's the tiniest little place and they were welcoming everybody from the planet and they felt so incredibly proud about that. And I thought that's a really beautiful moment.
Yeah, amazing story out of all the hostile and negative reporting, about the place and about
Mm,
it's incredible. And all these ordinary people,
yeah.
they have such a beautiful story. And this is related to the next question I'm going to ask. You have observed that the Olympics and United Nations are the only two places where almost every nation gathers and attends, and how these two places have often mirrored the same international tensions and the political entanglements, like the Cold War and the new Cold War. In your view, why has a sport become such a battlefield for ideology and geopolitics?
I think because it does attract the world. The world is watching, and mostly they're watching to support their team. Everybody likes to see their team or their athletes do well on a world stage. And so, because of that, in many ways, sport is now hijacked by different lobby groups or people that have different agendas because they know that if they can link their issue or their agenda to the sporting platform, they will get worldwide coverage. That's what happens because everyone is tuned into the big events, the World Cup, World Championships, the International Olympics. And so, because of that, we're seeing more tension than ever, I think, because everyone's trying to use it for their part of the story. And I think it makes it very difficult for people who run these big sporting organisations because if you think about national politics, there's going to be conflict between parties or whatever. If you think about some of the regional politics, there's also conflicts here and there. But if you think about being the president of an international sporting organisation like FIFA or the Olympics, you have got more than 200 countries, all with different histories, different cultures, different agendas, all turning up, hoping to compete on the same stage and be cheering different things. Can you imagine running one of these organisations? And so I have a lot of empathy for the people that do. And I'll give you, with Gianni Infantino, who's the president of FIFA at the moment, and he awarded the FIFA Peace Prize to President Trump at the end of last year. And he's copped all sorts of criticism from then. People saying, well, what's this Peace Prize and what are you doing it for? And you're just trying to buy support. And I was thinking about this. I thought, first of all, people are getting very worked up about the FIFA Peace Prize, which never existed. No one knows what it's for, or it's got no history. I mean, who cares? You make up a prize and you give it to someone who is really impacting the way the world is working at the moment. And you've got a major event coming up in his country, and you can see all of these tension points flashing around, and you start thinking to yourself, oh my God, how am I going to keep this show on the road? Donald Trump says he would love a Peace Prize. He's never been given one. We can invent one. We can give him one. Will it help our FIFA World Cup get to the finish line, all in one piece? And I can understand in that regard why you would do something like that. And of course, I understand why people get worked up about that. But it's incredibly difficult to consider how you do bring 200 plus countries together in your backyard or in anyone's backyard and hope for happy days. And yet, all of this stuff bubbles around the major events. When they start, everyone tunes into the sport and their team and the success stories. So it's quite interesting how quickly some of these agendas and other tensions can wash away. Not always, but quite often they do.
Mm-mm. Yeah, it's a fascinating to see to be shown the other side that you can see, and ordinary people like me, and I only see the other side, exactly as you said, that there's critical views of why giving Donald Trump a Peace
Mm.
Prize. Yeah, it's
Yeah, I
really
think it was the
interesting.
hopeful Peace Prize.
Mm, mm,
Hopefully,
mm,
you'll
mm,
keep
mm.
the peace for the FIFA World Cup so
Yeah,
we can
yeah,
just
yeah,
put on a good tournament
yeah,
and then
yeah.
we'll leave you to it.
Just as you've had a fascinating career, you've also lived an equally fascinating life. And what struck me reading your book was, and also knowing you, was your curiosity, determination, independence, resilience, and your remarkable ability to see the funny side of otherwise disastrous situations. And the year 2000 perhaps was the most dramatic period of all. You got married, left your big role at Channel 7, had your son, and moved to Hong Kong, all within a single year. Not only did you survive those enormous changes, but you thrived and went on to bigger, greater opportunities. How did you manage that transition without suffering a meltdown? What was your secret weapon?
Can I tell you, my since Stan, my husband, met my mother, she's been predicting um, I'm going to have a major collapse. She's been predicting that for 25 years now. It's not going to happen, Jing. I can guarantee it's not going to happen because I don't get worked up like that. And you're right. I kind of just, you know, whatever happens, happens. Like, what can you do about it? You can get stressed or worked up, but in the end, the sun rises tomorrow. Something is going to happen, and we can impact things the way we think is best. And from my point of view, if can I swear? If the shit's hitting the fan, me adding to that is not going to help. And so I always see my role in those situations as just being the calm person in the room, and trying to work out where the bits are going to fall and try and prevent that causing any harm. So, yeah, that's just, my approach to life. And that was a very interesting year, very dramatic. When we moved to Hong Kong, Stan was working for CNN and I didn't have a job yet, but we had the three kids and a new home and we were trying to find, where we would end up setting up a more permanent home. And CNN had organised there was a seminar or conference they were part of. So I went along just to see what was going on. And you know how Hong Kong is, it's fast paced and everyone's got a million things. And various people would come up to me and say, "Oh, who are you? What do you do?" And it's like, "Oh, well, my name's Tracy. I just moved here. I'm a housewife at the moment." And they'd all just turn around and walk off like, who wants to talk to a housewife, right? So I was walking around the room and there was a woman with a stall who was reading cards, tarot cards. I've never done anything like this. But since there was no one to talk to, I thought I'll go and talk to her. So she said, "Do you want me to read your cards?" I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." So she's pulling out these cards or asked me to pull some cards out, however it worked. And as she was laying them down, she was looking at me and then she'd pull out another one and she'd look at me. And I thought, what's going on? Anyway, she said to me, "I've never seen cards like this. I have never seen cards like this. I'm really sorry. If you survive the next year and then the next 10 years, you're amazing." And I thought, anyone else who heard that kind of verdict might go away and collapse. But I thought that was very funny. And I survived the year and the 10 years and the 10 years after that. You just keep going, don't you? You go until you stop.
Mm. I think that has a lot to do with your bravery and, like the way that you deal with the crisis, but also you're quite brave because reading this book, you were offered and walked away from many opportunities. You hand in your resignation so many times that I lost the count. I'm so envious of that and so admire your courage. And you've said that you are not someone who ever looks back with regrets. But have you ever, like even while writing this book, found yourself thinking about the road not taken?
Never.
Mm,
Never, never, ever. Because I think before, it can all sound a little bit too frivolous, like I just roll with the punches. It's a bit more than that. I think I'm quite considered. I think a lot in my subconscious, a lot goes in, and at the back of my mind, I know before I say anything or do anything or make my decision, I've thought about all the options. And I try to think about them in a circular way, not a linear way. And I realized that I read a book called The Geography of Thought, written by a psychologist many years ago. And it was really interesting. And he'd done some studies comparing the differences between Western linear thought and, Eastern Asian kind of circular thought. And why I thought that was fascinating was because I know I've always thought in a much more circular way than a linear way. And so for lots of other people, choosing that fork or that fork is a major decision. But the way I see it, it's all flowing around and coming back anyway, and in some sense, all roads lead to Rome at some point. And so before I make any decision, I've had it swirling around in the back of my mind. So by the time I make my decision, there's nothing left for me to wonder about. There's nothing left for me to think, oh, what if? And there's no point doing that anyway, because you can't go back to the what ifs. And I feel like I've only got time to go forward, not
mm.
look in the rearview mirror.
It's a great way exhausting what ifs before you actually take that step.
Mm.
And in 2018, this is you have such a fascinating life. 2018, your family discovered that your great grandfather was a Chinese doctor called
Mm.
Joseph Lin, who came from Fujian province of China in the 1850s during the gold rush. What did that discovery do to your thoughts about immigration and about this country's history?
Look, I think I was pretty aware of this country's history, but I had no idea that I had this link to that time. And as it turns out, Stan had bought a small property in an area which is on the road between Sydney and Melbourne, a very small gold mining town called Adelong. And we've got 5 acres there. It's so beautiful. And there's a creek that runs down the bottom of our property. And quite often in summer, we follow that creek down and we go swimming in the rock pools at the old gold mine. And that's where my great great grandfather worked. So it's quite incredible that we've ended up back there, in the waters of the creek. It's the same waters coming off the mountain and flowing down to the area where there were so many Chinese workers at that time. But also in this same location is where the Anti-China League began in Australia, because there were thousands of Chinese gold miners that were living in the town. They also started their market gardens, they had shops, they were quite industrious, and some angst was developing with the locals, and the Anti-China League started, which was one of the reasons why this link with our Chinese ancestors got lost, because this Joseph Lin had 3 children and with a white woman who had Irish heritage. And they started being teased at school for being half Chinese. So they changed their name from Lin, that was their surname, to Holmes, which was her previous dead husband's name. And I now still carry the name of someone I'm not genetically related to. And the story just kind of got slowly buried in the family
Mm,
until it was rediscovered. And what was interesting was even my father, and I remember ringing him and saying, Dad, no, I went round to see him. Dad, did you know your great grandfather was Chinese? And he just looked at me. I said, you did. You did then, because you're not shocked at all. When were you going to tell us? And sort of bit by bit, more stories are coming out from all the family members that know something that kind of buried it through a sense of necessity, I suppose, because of the times and the difficulty. But there's still a lot of Chinese families that live in that area. And, this is the sort of ever evolving story of Australia and the different patterns and flows and waves that have come in and out of this country to make us who we are. And we're going through another period of that now. You know, we can see
Yeah.
that with Pauline Hanson, and not unique to Australia, it's happening all around the world. So I think there's always these kind of, you know, upheavals and then they settle, and then there's another upheaval and it settles. And yeah, it's people trying to find their way as the world continues to evolve.
Mm. I love the way you describe how you understand Matt or started the relationship, because when you understand, along with the Channel 7 team, was sent to Grace to cover the lightning of flame at ancient Olympia, you wrote, as it turned out, it was more than the Olympic flame that was lit in Grace. I love that. And you also said Stan is the most extraordinary person you've ever met, and you always talk, and your 25-year-long conversation about philosophy, about psychology, about the society, about politics, about history is nowhere near its conclusion. I'm curious to know, have you ever thought about collaborating on a project or a program together? Was it a conscious agreement not to?
No, no, it would be the end of us. Just the conversations are enough. No, literally, you know, from the moment we wake up, excuse me, until late at night, when he's still talking and I eventually fall asleep, or I'm still talking and he's got a book in his hand and the book falls out of his hand, it's always alive, very much, and we don't agree on so many things. But we talk around, you know, and we try and bring each other into our orbit and how we see things and what experience we've had. And I've got to say, I'll be honest, I don't think he's ever lost an argument. So he's on the upside of, you know, the ledger in that regard. But, and, you know, our youngest son is the same. So now there's three of us that are just going at it constantly. And our young son's girlfriend, they've been together for 5 years now. But when she first came around and we were sitting having dinner one night and we started talking, and the talking gets more animated, gets louder. And I remember seeing her face like she just didn't know, like, is this what always happens? And I remember seeing her and said, Millie, it's okay. This is what always happens. Don't worry. It's friendly. It's like, it's a friendly battle. You know, we're each trying to win our point of view. And you don't know where the conversation's going to lead to next. Now she joins in. So there's four of us having these very loud conversations about the world. But it's fabulous. But we'd never work together, no.
Oh, I still look forward to one day you join together doing one program. I think it will be really fascinating. But
Mhm.
when we talk about, Stan, the family, and you, and we kind of we have to talk about racism, the question of racism. And I want to take from your perspective, because you've written about moments when racist remarks were directed at Stan's family members, and you had to step in and say, they are with me. So what did those experiences teach you about, how most effective a way to confront and challenge racism?
I think it really showed me that there's still so much work to do. And, you know, lots of people will say, I've never seen racism in this country. And that's fine. They probably haven't. But they haven't been with somebody who is constantly facing racism. And even our sons, when we came back from overseas. So this was interesting because there's three boys, three Indigenous boys. They all identify as Indigenous. And they'd be walking through whichever part of town, or particularly if they were near Redfern, or Glebe, and police would stop them and want them to empty their bags, like based on just the fact that they're Indigenous. And I think they were shocked by that because they had spent the bulk of their childhood outside of the country. So they were very proud of being Indigenous, but they didn't realise it came with this. And they only confronted it when they came back to what is supposed to be their country. So I think that was really challenging for them. But yeah, it showed me that we still have a long way to go. And I remember Stan was once emceeing a reconciliation dinner, and people had paid a lot of money to be there. So there's a lot of support, and there always has been a lot of support. So Stan asked for everybody to stand up. And he said, okay, sit down if you are Indigenous. And so a few people sat down. Sit down if you're married to an Indigenous person or you have Indigenous children. A few more sat down. Sit down if you've had an Indigenous family at your house at Christmas to have a Christmas meal or any kind of a celebratory meal. Hardly anyone sat down.
Mm.
Sit down if you work with Indigenous people. Hardly anyone sat down. And so he asked a few of these questions. And then he said, just have a look around the room and you'll see we've got a long way to go, haven't we? Because if we haven't had those person to person experiences, how can we actually resolve the big differences underneath?
Yeah, so powerful. Such a powerful way. We have to jump to another, so much to cover, and we have to jump to technology AI. We cannot avoid that because technology and are changing the world and are reshaping sport. What's your view on ideas like, to me, they are quite radical, but it doesn't seem to be so radical because it's often talked about, like ideas like enhanced games. What's your
Mm.
view?
I watched the Enhanced Games, a week or so ago in Las Vegas. It was the first edition of them. And but I've also been aware from the start that the people backing the enhanced games are the people that work in that industry. They produce these supplements or drugs, or they're part of the longevity industry. People who don't want to age, people who don't want to get ill, they want to keep their body in peak condition, like be 25 forever. And there's a huge industry out there. I think it's worth between 25 and $30 billion annually now. So it's not a little small area. It's not a small pocket trying to sell the message. There's a lot of people who are engaged in this, and so I see it quite differently, obviously, because most elite sport is along the lines. If you're talking the Olympics, it's about clean sport and doping free. This is at the opposite end, but they're not saying take everything you can and let's see what happens. They had, medical supervision. They were documenting what was happening to each of the athletes who was on a program. But I only learnt last night that this program that the athletes were on would cost somebody about $25,000 a month. So it's not for everybody. So it's very highly specialized in what it does. So the two are like sort of the extremes. And I think people can almost separate how they want to watch elite sport and with how they want to live their lives. And if they want to be part of this, longevity, wellness makeup. Yeah, so there's some interesting crossovers that will start to happen, and I think both sides are going to have to come back towards the middle a little because everyone can't afford that, and I also think elite sport can't keep surviving kind of like that, because a lot of the athletes have said, look, if we can actually access supplements that help us heal quicker to get us back to peak form, not to enhance us while we compete. That's been an argument that's been happening for about 25 years or so since anti-doping first began. So yeah, there's some interesting discussion points to be had. I don't think one is going to destroy the other. I think they'll both kind of coexist in their own areas, but it's where society goes. And it's what society's expectations are and what they're prepared to tolerate. And sometimes we find ourselves heading places in a society, and it's only when we get there that we go, ooh, we didn't think about those ramifications, did we? And then we have a whole new other set of problems that we need to think about. And obviously, as the world changes so quickly with AI and technology, we're all kind of racing to keep up. It's like it's happening in front of us, and we're trying to get there to be with it. And once we get there, we go, oh my gosh, but what about that? And what about this? And what about these people? So yeah, there's going to be a lot of work to do. It's going to be a very different world very quickly.
Mm. So this leads to my last question before I get to students to ask their questions. Um, you said it is the journalist of tomorrow. who must have found new ways of storytelling in a fractured world and equally fractured media landscape. What advice would you give the next generation of journalists?
I think the more I see things change, the more I see it's the same one, same story, same event, just unfolding differently. And so, what we've seen with the advent of social media or the internet, like it magnifies everything. So, it magnifies the good voices and the bad voices. But still, people seek out the good voices. And the media's always been the same. Before we had the internet and before we had social media, there was media for the base, and there was media for the intellectuals, and there were people who were recognised as being very good at their jobs that people would follow. So I think in that respect, it's the same thing. The cream will stand out. But the access you've got to the world and to multiple platforms and to AI to help you do your work better, I find that really, really exciting. And so my advice is it's the same as it's always been. Work hard, talk to lots of people, have lots of contacts, stay enthusiastic, love what you do, and embrace the change around you.
Embrace, yes, so enlightening, and such positive advice that you give. Lastly, I would like to quote your words to end our conversation. You said, I also see a role for sport in promoting peace over war, cultivating understanding over disagreement, and a friendship over hostilities. So beautifully put. Thank you so much, Tracey.
Thank you so much, Jean.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank
Pleasure to
you.
talk to you.
Thank you, audience. And our next episode of a Writers in Conversation will feature the Honourable Bob Carr, the former New South Wales Premier of 11 years and a former Foreign Affairs Minister, to speak about his latest memoir, Bring Back Yesterday. So see you next time. Have a good night.